Welcome to this tutorial on ArpSeq. ArpSeq is a plugin, operates either as VST or AU on Mac. It also operates on Mac as VST, but currently there is no Pro Tools AAX version, but that is planned for the future. There are two modes to ArpSeq, arpeggiator mode and sequencer mode. Arpeggiator mode operates as a traditional arpeggiator in its basic form, but has far more advanced capabilities. An arpeggiator will take the notes played or received and will play certain notes in a certain sequence, and that's the principle of the arpeggiator. You could play all notes per step, or it could play certain notes. Obviously you can have steps that don't play anything at all. So the sequencer mode will take an input note and then play a sequence based on that input note. This will make more sense when we get to it later. The routing of the arpeggiator is important. It doesn't, unless you're running on Logic, it doesn't operate like a traditional plugin, because you need to route the output of our ArpSeq into a separate track. On Ableton, we've got ArpSeq on track 1, and we've got two synths on tracks 2 and 3. And in Ableton, you select the input channel for your MIDI, and we've got it set to ArpSeq. And then, without going into any details, you've got a second option where you also select ArpSeq. So essentially the data's coming from this clip and it's being sent to the synth, which in this case is a guitar, an acoustic guitar. I've got a second track which we haven't got active at the moment, which is silent. But as you can see, we've got the record enabled, so that will receive the data from ArpSeq. We've also got record enabled here, which just means I could actually press, I could play on the keyboard, on the MIDI keyboard, and it would actually receive the data as well. So moving on to the overview of the global parameters. So we have, first of all, a preset manager. We click on the name here, it will bring up the preset manager. We can have a number of folders, and then within each folder we can have categories. It's telling you how many entries there are per folder or per category, and then we now have the individual presets. We've got a few duplicates because this is just set up on my computer, which I'm currently in test mode. We can filter on only arpeggiator presets or only sequencer presets. We can then also type part or all with a name. So that's now filtering on anything with role in the title. I won't show it now, but as you're going through, in fact I can actually show this now. Let me play the sequence that's currently operating. I can actually click on a preset and it will actually start playing that, which is obviously great. You're not having to load the preset and you're not having to overwrite an existing preset. So that's a very quick way of previewing. If I load that one, double click, and now that is loaded into the arpeggiator mode. Okay, you can add or you can click the plus button to initialize a blank preset. You can edit the name by clicking the pencil icon. You can save as or save over an existing preset, or you can delete. Next, moving on to the options here, we've got retrig. What retrig when it is set to orange, which is continuous, will always commence from the beginning at step 1 every time a new note is received. In one-shot mode, it will only trigger to the beginning on the first note received, but subsequently will continue. So if we I'm just going to play a note, so I'm just going to hold down C, and then I'm stopping, and as you can see, it just carries on. If I click on continuous and then keep letting go, and then lastly in off mode, which really you wouldn't use, it will just, doesn't matter what, it will just carry on from where you left off. Typically it's in continuous mode. Now loop, what loop will do is cycle through the steps continuously. Otherwise it will only cycle the once. I can't think of many examples where you'd only have the once, but let's just show that happening. There we go. And then continuous. Okay, hold will continue operating after MIDI data has stopped being received. So if I click on hold and just press one note, I've let go. Okay, record was something I was going to explain later, but seeing as it's the next button, I will show it now. Basically, you've got several modes of recording. Recording will allow the data that's the MIDI data that would normally be sent out of the arpeggiator to another track to be recorded internally, and then you can drag that onto your DAW, and it will then essentially export the MIDI. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to click on record. I can select the duration. I can have one loop. That's all the steps for a particular preset, or I could select a fixed number of bars. So we go for 2 bars. That's now armed, and that will then start recording as soon as it receives the first MIDI note. So I'm playing the chord of C. Okay, and now move out of the way. You can see that now allows me to drag my MIDI clip, and you can see we have the actual MIDI notes there. So if I just solo the first track, we can hear that playing. So that's a nice quick way of getting a short clip of MIDI into your DAW. Okay, moving on, we've got the transpose button, which basically will transpose the entire output of the MIDI data up or down a number of semitones from -24 to +24, so 2 octaves. As with all the dials here, you can right click and click default. You can also double click to manually type in a number. Steps is the number of steps in the preset, so I can go back down to 1, or the maximum is 128. If we've got 128, we can scroll. That will actually scroll automatically as it's playing. And again, I can double click and type in a number 16. Speed is the relative speed to the DAW's BPM, and I've never used that at all, but it's there if you need it. Swing will apply a swing groove to your after your preset. Those that understand swing, well, there's no need to explain. I'm not going to get into any technicalities on this tutorial. Gate length. That controls the global gate length, which essentially is the duration that the note is held down. So it receives the MIDI on data, which starts playing the note, and it will play for the duration based on the global parameter by default, but you can then manually set each step's length, which we'll go into in a second. There's going to be an update coming very soon, which will actually have a start offset, so you'll be able to determine how much of a delay there is after the step starts to when the note begins, which will be designed to give a human feel, and that will have a second dial. Well, it'll be a dual dial, so you'll have two, an outer and an inner ring. That's coming soon. Velocity, that's the velocity of the MIDI data, which essentially is how hard you've hit the note if you're playing on a MIDI keyboard. And very similar to the gate length, you have a global value, but then you can individually set a step value. Next we have velocity between step and key. Basically that determines whether you're going to use the velocity as defined per step in the arpeggiator, or whether you're going to use the value as input or as received from externally into the arpeggiator. You can choose, or you can have it in between, and it applies a simple algorithm to work out the value, but the default is the step value, so it is the arpeggiator that determines the velocity of each step. We then have the global note length, which you can set. 1/16 is the default. You can go up to 1/64. You can have triplets and dotted. There we go. And lastly, in arpeggiator mode, we have the range that the arpeggiator can operate from 1 to 4 octaves, which I'll demonstrate later. We then have trigger banks, which I will show in a little while. And then you have preview, where you can actually select a simple sine or sawtooth waveform. If I disable, or should I say solo, Pro ArpSeq, you'll hear, it's quite primitive, but it plays internally. It's sufficient for you to preview, especially if you're going to use the record facility to export manually. Okay, moving on, we have a cycle or looping capability. If I select, let's say, the last 4 steps, that automatically activates the loop, and essentially it will play from 1 through to 16, and then will cycle from 13 to 16. So if I now activate the door, turn off our there we go. And then lastly, you can right click and select a starting point. So I could actually, can't think why you would, but you could start from step 5. So it gives you complete control. You can then disable that just by clicking the loop icon. If I had chosen to have a longer preset, let's say 64 steps, Now we don't actually have any values set here, but let's not worry about the audio that's coming out. But let's just assume I want to leave this from step 33. Okay, just using the scroll wheel. So I'm now going to start playing, but it's not moving. It's not moving the steps. If I disable that, it scrolls through one page at a time. There we go. Back to 16 steps. And let's move back to the beginning. Okay, moving on to the global. Well, they're not so much global. They're global to the steps for both sequencer and arpeggiator mode. So in arpeggiator mode, you have all these properties, whether you're in arpeggiator or sequencer. Let's look at dividers then. I'm going to load a preset with dividers before we start. Dividers allow you to divide a step into a number of divisions, basically 2, 3 or 4, or off to leave it at the default value. If you have 2, 3 or 4, it will just play that note an even length, twice, 3 times or 4 times. You can select increase option, where it will increase the intensity as it plays, or decrease, where it will decrease the intensity. And then lastly, you've got random, where it will play a random intensity. So let's just add in an extra step here, where I'm going to select random on that step there. I'm going to slow down to 1/8, and I'll just let this play. Okay, you can hear that. I'm now going to deactivate them all. I can basically hold down the control key and just click on each step, and that will replicate the last selected value. And now if we play, so there we go. Next is the strumming mode. So I'm going to load a strumming preset. I think I've got a here we go. So basically, strum will apply a delay for each note played, and you set the delay here. You can have from 1 to 50 milliseconds. Traditionally or typically, a guitar would have about 6 milliseconds between each string. You can then have a downward or upward strum, or you can have it doing up and down within the same step, or down and up. So we've got a number of steps here. Not every step is playing, and all notes will be triggered, assuming we've got incoming MIDI data for each of those notes. There we go, that's the strum feature. Next is note length. The note length defaults to the global note length of 1/16, but you could set, if you wanted, a per step value. I'm just going to change this. It'll sound a bit strange. Typically, you're using the global, but you've got the flexibility So let's just see how this sounds. There we go. So I'm going to set this back to global. Hold on, global. Global. Next is velocity. As explained earlier, you can set the global velocity, but you can also set the per step velocity. There is a new revision coming shortly which allows you to randomize everything and set templates, so you can specify exactly which steps are to be randomized and which are to be retained. But for the time being, the velocity randomization feature is a single parameter, which here, if I set it to 30%, will reduce the velocity by up to 30%. So if I now play this, you'll be able to hear some variation in velocity. Put it back to 0. But obviously you could set your own values, so we could change that one there, that one there. And you'll be able to hear this now. So there we have velocity. Next is gate length, which again we can set globally, but we could set per step. So if I set the velocity on some of the steps, you'll be able to hear that. It rather depends on the preset, whether gate length is going to be noticed. It all depends on your ADSR on your. So if I go to a different synth, you'll be able to hear that more clearly. Go. Next is probability, which is the probability of a note being played. So if I set that to roughly 50%, then it will only play the third step on average half of the time. There we go. And then next we have mod wheel, which basically sets the value of the mod wheel. It depends on the preset, on the sound that you've got on your synth, and whether the mod wheel is affecting the sound coming out. It is on this particular one. So if I set that on a couple of them, here we go. There we go. And then lastly, we've got some flexibility with MIDI controllers. If you know what MIDI controllers are, then that will make sense. If you don't, it's not nothing you need to worry about. But you can select which channel you're going to control, and then you can basically again set the value to be sent to that particular controller. I think breath control is one I can think of off the top of my head, but it's not something that is used very often, but it's there if you need it. I think that concludes the global parameters. So we'll now move on to the arpeggiator itself. So I'm going to load, in fact what I'm going to do, I'm going to set a brand new preset. I'm going to set it to 1 step and show you the simplest of all. You can essentially specify what note is going to be played. Note 1, note -1, -1 basically determines where it's going to play. It's going to play the first note of an incoming chord. And if we now play, okay, it's just playing the first note, but I could hold down the control key because it remembers the last operator I selected, which was note. I could click on the third row and that will now play notes 1 and 3. And if I click on the second, we get all 3 notes. That's not what you would class as a typical arpeggiator. So I'm going to select a different operator. This time I'm going to select U or up 1, shown as U1. What that will do, it will play the first note on the incoming chord and then will move up 1 note in the chord and cycle back to the beginning indefinitely. Now we're currently set to 1 octave. Let's set that to 2 octaves. Go to 3 octaves. I'm now going to show you different options. You get an idea. We're basically skipping notes in the chord. I'm now going to select up 1 repeat. Up 1 repeat will basically play from the beginning of the chord up to the top, to give, depending on the number of octaves, and then start again. Up 1 double repeat will play each note twice and then start again at the beginning. Let's load in an example. So we've now got 8 steps playing. It's going to play the first note of the chord coming in, then the third, then the second, third, first, and so on and so on. We've actually got the ability to transpose the step up or down a set number of semitones. So let's just play this. That was set at, actually just press escape, that's set at +12. There we go. I think that really explains the principles of the arpeggiator mode. There's various things you can do. I'm just going to show a couple of them here. You could repeat the previous note. You can hold the previous note or tie. Hold will hold all notes played. Tie will hold a specific note. So you can have multiple ties on a given step. So we'll select hold here, and this one here I'm going to select highest. That will play the highest note. Okay, let's move on to the sequencer. So in sequencer mode, you select which notes you want to play simply by left clicking with the mouse, or deactivating by clicking again, and you're essentially creating a step sequencer pattern. So I'm just making that all based on C3, and if I play C3 I'll get that pattern. Not particularly exciting. I can drag a note out. Let's see what we get here, and I can click and then drag to move it. Let's turn retrig on, so that starts at the beginning every time. But the difference here is, whatever note I play on the keyboard, it will transpose what I hear. So I'm going to play F. A, C. And then I could add additional notes in. And here we go. Just going down one semitone at a time. So it doesn't matter how many notes I play, it will always use the lowest note to trigger the sequence. I can click on this icon here to expand the piano. And there we are. That's fundamentally all there is to the sequencer. Now this kind of leads me on to trigger banks, because you can see I've got some text here which are basically presets, and a preset can be assigned to a note on the keyboard. So if I press C0, it will activate All I Want Riff 1, which it has, and D0, and as I move up you can see it's selecting different presets. That is achieved here. We can have up to 20 banks, and then you can edit the bank and you can basically select a preset selection menu. That can be incredibly handy when playing live, and also equally handy in your DAW, because basically you just need to add a MIDI note of the appropriate value to trigger different presets. If I play live, well, play the entire sequence that we've got here, and I'm just going to press the different preset options. I'm actually going to select the guitar on this one. And there we go, trigger banks. The last thing I'm going to show you regarding recording is the ability to record externally in sequencer mode. So on my DAW I've got quite a long sequence, although it's just repeating itself. But let's say I want to record, let's keep it to 32 steps. I can then select external recording and specify how many steps to record. One loop will mean 32 steps, and all I need to do is basically let the DAW play and it will record that into the sequencer. There we go. If I scroll up, there we have that MIDI information. It's not a lot there. So now, if I just play C3, let's record externally something a little bit more rhythmical. So what I'm going to do first of all, I'm just going to go to the DAW. I've deleted my original MIDI clip. I'm going to turn the metronome on, and I'm just going to play one note, but it's all about the rhythm that I'm wanting to get into the arpeggiator or in fact sequencer. I said arpeggiator because that is the whole point. I want to get this rhythmic idea into the arpeggiator, which otherwise would be quite tedious. So I'm just going to click record. There we go. So I'm going to quantize this first. Let's just reduce this down to 2 bars. There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to go into the arpeggiator. I'm going to activate external recording for 1 loop. There we go. And now I'm going to export that into the arpeggiator. The only point of doing this is to get the rhythmic pattern into the arpeggiator. But now I've got that in, I could then apply. Now if I just press play a chord, that's not very exciting, but I could decide to use the operators. So I'm going up 1 note in the chord. I'm going to play the highest note at that point. I'm then going to go down 1 note, and again, and again, and then I'm going to go up 1 note. Just got rid of the tie there. If I want to hold that particular note, click hold. Going to carry on going up, and then down, down, down. So now if I play a chord, I've got the rhythm from doing the import. That's set to 1 octave. Let's set that to 2 octaves. Anyway, that's showing you the point of being able to externally record and also to export internally from the sequencer into the arpeggiator, if only to get the rhythm, which is a significant time-saving exercise, because trying to get this rhythm by trial and error would be tedious. Okay, that sums up pretty much everything you need to know to get going and creating your own presets. Have fun.